Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us across the great Louisiana plain, where we are having so much fun advancing the cause of constitutional freedom in Louisiana, and slowly but surely, day by day, and on some days quite rapidly, draining the vast Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom, brought to you by freedom-loving Louisiana First Patriots. Hello, State of Freedom warriors. Thank you so much for joining us today, for inviting us to be part of your day. We are so thankful for you. As I always say, and I mean it every time, you are the absolutely best listening family anyone could possibly hope for. And we are only here because of your encouragement, your prayers, your friendship, your financial support. If you're looking for a way to support us, to advertise with us, or to send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. We'd also really appreciate it if you'd help us get the word out and spread the reach of the State of Freedom. Like the show on whatever platform you listen to us, subscribe to it, share it. You can share short clips from YouTube and Rumble instead of sharing the whole episode, and links to those are always in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us. We are so honored to be affiliate partners for General Michael Flynn's movie, Flynn, Deliver the Truth, Whatever the Cost. The DVD can be purchased from several popular retailers, and he's on tour screening and promoting the film. If you'd like to support General Flynn and the State of Freedom, visit freedomstate.us to get your copy of the DVD, to buy Flynn movie merchandise, or purchase tickets to a live screening. Our affiliate link is also in the show notes. Today we have an update for you that will show you the best and worst of what's happening at the legislature. You'll get a little more than just a taste of what's going on. But before we get into the bills, let me read the scripture of the day. It's Psalm chapter 11, verses 3 through 7. And it says, "What can the righteous accomplish when truth's pillars are destroyed and law and order collapse? Yet the Lord is never shaken. He is still found in his temple of holiness, reigning as king over all. He closely watches and examines everything man does. With a glance, his eyes examine every heart, for his heavenly rule will prevail over all. The Lord tests both the righteous and the wicked. God's very soul detests lovers of violence. He will rain down upon them judgment for their sins. A scorching wind will be their lot in life. But remember this, the Lord is the righteous one who loves justice, and every godly one will gaze upon his face." You know, we can look on the state of our nation, and some days it can seem like all hope is lost. I can feel like the ones we trusted and believed and were counting on have let us down. It can feel like we worked so hard to bring about change and things still seem deadlocked. We can get so frustrated, and if we're not careful, we can get into despair. But let's remember that the Lord is never shaken. He sees it all, and he will judge it all. And I truly believe that we're living in days where we will see the Lord's justice with our own eyes. I don't think all of the justice that's coming will be reserved for the final judgment. This passage tells us that his heavenly rule will prevail over all. He will prevail over all. So keep hoping in him. Keep believing in him. Keep reminding yourself and your battle partners that he is faithful, he is just, and he will come through. Our words have power. Our testimonies of God's faithfulness has power. Our worship in the midst of darkness has great power. Don't give in to despair. That's what the enemy wants. You drive out despair with your spiritual weapons of warfare: praise, thanksgiving, laughter, testimony, and generosity. And watch how the Lord shows up, because he will show up.
You know, we have to remember, Danielle, that it's amazing how the devil will come at you when he kind of senses that you're weaker, or he senses that your vulnerabilities. And he'll try to come in and get into your mind and try to do all these things to make you weak and discouraged. And that's when I have to remember, that love and faithfulness are not a feeling, they are a commitment. And we have to remember to be faithful to the Lord, because he's always faithful to us. And a lot of times these things that we go through at times are tests, that will increase our faith. And we just have to remember, you're exactly right what you said a few minutes ago, that sometimes it looks like, leaders have let us down. Like, for instance, I feel like we've been let down on the federal bill that would have repealed warrantless spying by the federal government. Our U.S. Congress had an opportunity to repeal warrantless spying. The Fourth Amendment says that unless you have an affidavit of probable cause signed by a judge who's reviewed the record, you cannot spy on Americans. You cannot do that randomly. You cannot do it. And yet we have a Congress, U.S. Congress, that failed to repeal that provision of the Foreign Interference Surveillance Act 2 days ago. And it's very discouraging when we have a Republican Congress that we fought very hard for to get elected there. Sometimes I feel let down. So I know other Americans feel let down as well. But it's precisely in those moments that we have to keep moving forward and trust that God's justice will prevail. And we have to continue forward every day and always remember that he never sleeps.
Yeah, exactly. He never sleeps and he sees everything. And so all we can do is keep our faith up, keep our hopes up. I think keep our spirits up, The joy of the Lord is our strength, as I like to remind us all the time and remind myself. These scriptures are as much for us as they are for our listeners. I've said it plenty of times before, but this is all so we can focus ourselves and recenter before we get into some heavy topics that are very divisive and it helps us. It helps us a lot. And it's just a really great reminder to be focused on the Lord before we turn to the work of the day. So I'm glad we get the opportunity to do this, Chris.
And to offer everything to him.
That's right. That's right. Well, today, Chris, we have so much is going on. It's like the legislature is just hemorrhaging bills. I'm not really sure what happened. I know Wednesday there was that big wind event. And so this past Wednesday, they canceled committee hearings for a good portion of for the whole day. And I think they just took in on a shorter day in the afternoon once things settled down. But I can tell you one thing, there's no shortage of bills. They copy pasted those bills into this week ahead on top of the ones that they had already had slated. I'm not convinced that they cut anything. So there's a lot here. A lot has happened this past week. Before we get into what's happened, let me just remind everyone, let me remind you how important your engagement is. Please go to the LACAG website, lacag.org, bookmark it, visit it a few times a week. Some people are even visiting it daily and just taking action on those bills that are most meaningful to them. You won't regret it. Sign up for the action alerts. We will not fill up your inbox. We haven't even sent an action alert in quite some time because there's so many things that are happening. They're happening very rapidly. And really, for a lot of it, you determine what's most important to you. We make a lot of it available to you right there on the website. So just please go ahead and do that. And if you can, try and make it to the legislature and attend some committee hearings. Make your voice heard. It's important and you will make a difference. I guarantee you will make a difference.
Absolutely. Everybody can make a difference. And, Danielle, we're going to make sure that anybody who comes to the legislature is treated well and walks out of there feeling and knowing that they've made a contribution, because they will have made a contribution on some very, very important bills, much of which we're going to talk about tonight.
We will talk about much tonight. That's right. That is right. Hold on to your hats, ladies and gentlemen, because we have a lot for you. We're going to try and make this short and sweet, but it doesn't always go that way. So here we go. Starting out with what happened just this past week, which actually quite a lot did happen. The first bill up is House Bill 114. It's by Representative Farnham. A lot of you who've been listening for a while know this is the annual supplemental canvas. He brought it last year. Here we go again.
Yeah. Let's hope we get it through this time.
Yeah, exactly. It passed. Of course, we were in support of this bill. It passed the House floor this past week in a 73-30 vote with 2 Democrats joining the Republicans. Those were Roy Adams and Chad Brown. 2 Republicans were absent, Kim Coates and Stephanie Hilferty. And Representative Farnham made an amendment on the floor that changed the effective date, which was our really our only sticking point with this bill was the effective date, Chris. And I think that this change was made thanks to pressure by engaged citizens, many LACAG members, many State of Freedom listeners who are not happy to wait until 2025 to get Louisiana's dirty voter rolls cleaned up.
I'll tell you right now that for about 2 weeks, every single day, Katie was mentioning to me and lamenting the fact that, look, it's a good bill. It requires a supplemental annual canvass of all registered voters every year to update the voter registration records, to see who no longer lives where their address is currently registered them, and to remove anybody who has not taken action in a certain period of time. I mean, this is just a very good way to clean up the voter rolls by requiring this annual canvass. But the problem was, as you said, Danielle, it wouldn't have gone into effect until March of 2025. But a floor amendment, because of a lot of pressure from a lot of citizens, now has this bill going into effect upon signature of the governor, which is a huge deal, which means that it's as soon as the governor signs it, that's when it becomes a law, and that's when that supplemental annual canvass should begin and should be substantially completed before the election, and it could make a very big difference. I'm just very thankful that it will be at least underway before the fall elections.
Yeah, because Chris, as Randy Russ and so many election experts have told us, and the dirty voter rolls is basically requirement for being able to inject the excess votes into the system. They need the voter rolls to be bloated, dirty, full of people who are not actually voting so that they can use the machines to flip the votes that way. So this will go a long way to improving the state of our elections in Louisiana.
And Danielle, just to remind the listeners, this would be on the books right now, but for a governor's veto last year, and we fell 2 Republicans short of overriding that governor's veto. Well, we had a couple of in the House, we had a couple of people absent, if you recall, but we won't get into that right now, who didn't bother to show up for the veto override session, or it would be law now, but hopefully this will become law this session, this year, soon.
Yeah, I wonder what Governor Edwards felt he had to gain from vetoing this bill on his way out the door. That's a question that remains to be answered, but we'll...
Absolutely. 600,000 people estimated to be on our voter rolls who don't belong there.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we see him, we can ask him. All right.
Yeah.
Next up, Senate Bill 302 by Senator Cathy. This is about traffic ticketing from remote devices, basically, these red light cameras. It passed in the Senate 37-0 with an amendment that, really kind of kneecapped the bill from what it was. You can tell us about that, Chris.
Well, it really has, it's down to just the handheld devices now. And there are certain limitations on the handheld devices, but there are just a lot of powers that be when it comes to the money that's made off of these red light bills, and so, but nonetheless, they still have to be a certain distance from a speed limit sign, and they have to be 1,000, I think 1,000 feet away from the speed limit sign. So people have to be able to see the speed limit sign and slow down before anybody can get ticketed for a red light. So there are going to be warnings in place now, but they're not that make anybody who's really an aware driver know that, okay, there's probably a cop up here with a radar gun. So you're going to have a warning on it, but it's not going to be, they're not outlawing them, which we hoped that they would be doing. But again, there's a lot of special interests and they make a lot of money off these things. So, but look, this is a step in the right direction. So if you're a conscientious driver, you should be able to see ahead that there's a guy up there with a radar gun, and you ought to bet, you will at least have plenty of time to slow down. That's a good thing.
Well, for me, it's too little, but I'll take what we can get on this. And look, This is from a woman who has a very old car. If I go over 60 miles an hour, my whole car shakes. So this is nothing specific to me and my need for speed. This is this is purely this is purely
So you mean,
about
Danielle, are you telling me when you're driving down 61, you're not pulling a Maverick saying, I feel the need for speed,
No,
baby?
if I want to
That's
get
not coming
anywhere
out of
on
your
time,
mouth
I
on
have to
there.
leave early. I have to leave early if I want to get anywhere on time because I can't even go the speed limit on an interstate. So that's another
Well,
problem for another
a
day.
lot of time for prayer in the car.
Yeah, prayer and podcasts.
Yeah.
All right, SB 283 by Duplessis. This is the gay prostitution bill. We thought it was going to get heard last week on the Senate floor. As you all may recall, the Senate committee, I believe it was Senate Judiciary C, if I recall correctly, voted this out of committee, and kind of a head scratcher, but it was not actually called last week. It was returned to the calendar. It's subject to call now. And Chris, as we look back on this, it seems that Senator Duplessis hasn't been 100% clear, perhaps not 100% honest about what this bill would actually do. So perhaps the people who voted it out of committee were not fully informed about the repercussions of this bill.
Well, I was surprised that the bill passed out of committee, a bill that would repeal a law prohibiting crimes against nature through solicitation, a commercial solicitation. So I went back and actually looked at Senator Duplessis' committee testimony, and what he basically said was that there was no longer any need for the crimes against nature through solicitation because we already have a prostitution law on the books, so it's basically the same thing. And, that's the way he pitched it to the committee. But that's not really true because prostitution is just general prostitution, typically involves a male and a female, whereas crimes against nature through commercial solicitation involves just that, a crime against nature, usually a male gay commercial prostitution. So the two crimes are not the same. So the suggestion that crimes against nature through solicitation is covered, its elements are covered under the general prostitution law is simply not true. But Royce was able to basically pitch that to the committee, convince them that we don't really have any need anymore for the crimes against nature through solicitation. So the committee agreed, the committee voted his bill to repeal what I call CANS, crimes against nature through solicitation, to repeal that law, voted it out of committee. And now, did you say, Danielle, that it was supposed to go to the Senate floor?
Yeah, it's pending. It's subject to call now. So I guess he didn't feel like he had the votes after maybe our listeners started chiming in on it.
Well, I guarantee that's what they did. Because let me tell you what, every Louisiana citizen understands the difference between general prostitution and a crime against nature, which is gay commercial prostitution. They're two different crimes, and there's no reason to take either one of them off the books. But that's yet what he wants to do. And he also wants to go back retroactively and vacate all of the convictions. But that one died in committee, fortunately. But we'll keep a close eye on this Duplessis bill, and hopefully the full floor in the Senate and the House will understand, look, there's a real difference. And plus, this is not going to play well with the public.
No.
If they vote for this. This is not going to play well with their constituents, and that's something that they should understand also.
Yeah, and maybe just a reminder to the listeners, this one is still active on the Action Center. So if you haven't let your senator know that this is something that you don't think needs to be legal in Louisiana, you go ahead and let them know. You can do that in 2 quick minutes right there on LACAG.org's Action Center.
2 minutes or less, baby.
That's right. Okay, next up, House Bill 103 Johnson. Y'all have heard about this bill a couple times already. This is just a simple transparency bill about broadcasting meetings, public meetings via live television or the internet. And it passed unanimously out of the House, and it's been received in the Senate. It's not been scheduled or sent to a committee yet.
Yeah, and this is, like you said, Danielle, a very simple transparency bill, but a very important transparency bill for parents, so that if they're unable to make a school board meeting and they have children, and they want to know what's going on in their schools and with their school board, and also with their local government in the municipal meetings, they can watch these meetings, real-time broadcasts. Now, there's not going to be archived as of yet, but Representative Johnson said that next year he will probably try to amend the bill to make it to where they're archived as well, so parents a day or two later can actually go back and watch the school board and municipal meetings then as well. But this is a very good first step in creating real transparency between government activities, government meetings, school board meetings, and parental access.
Yeah.
Bridge that gap.
Exactly. And Chris, someone raised a good point, and I wish I could remember who it was. It may have been Paige Lowry, but maybe the website that the committee has does not, is not set up for archiving yet or something like that. But YouTube certainly is. YouTube is an auto archive. So if they're televising these through the internet on YouTube, then there's no reason for them not to be able to archive it without any extra effort,
Yeah, I would think you would think they would be able to do that, and we're going to stay on this and continue to move it forward. But I'm glad that we have a first step in place here.
Yeah. Okay. Next up, a hot topic. HB 71 by Representative Horton. This is the bill that would require the display of the 10 Commandments in public schools. It was a little more controversial than you might expect. And I just wonder, Chris, if the controversy was because perhaps some of the legislators have not read the 10 Commandments. Perhaps they don't know what is in the 10 Commandments, because it's not objectionable at all if you just read the 10 Commandments. But there were several attempts to weaken this bill. It did pass a floor vote. There were several amendments brought to the floor by Democrats, but one amendment in particular, Amendment number 2755, was brought by Jason Hughes, and 10 Republicans voted in favor of it. Chris, before we say who they were, would you tell us what the amendment was aiming to do?
Very, very, very simple. The amendment would have made the posting of the 10 Commandments in public schools in Louisiana optional instead of mandatory, which essentially would have gutted the bill, because how many public institutions in Louisiana at this point who become thoroughly secularized would voluntarily post the 10 Commandments prominently in their schools or in their districts? Probably very, very few, which is why it needed to be mandatory. Yet there was Jason Hughes, the Democrat, who offered an amendment to try to make it optional instead of required. And you're right, 10 Republicans voted to make it optional to post the 10 Commandments in public schools in Louisiana, despite the fact that for the first 160 years of this country, the study of the Bible and the 10 Commandments were required reading in public schools, despite the fact that the first Bible ever commissioned in English in the United States was commissioned by the U.S. Congress and universally recommended for use among American citizens. I could go on and on and on, and it is just unfortunate that 10 Republicans, however, the good news is that the amendment failed.
The amendment failed. And I'll just list the 10 Republicans. Some of these are going to be surprising to you. At least they were surprising to me. Some of them were less surprising. But here they are: Mike Bayham, Bo Beaulieu, Jacob Broad, Vincent Cox, DeWitt Carrier, Jessica Domingue, Barbara Freiberg, Jeremy Lacombe, Brock Myers, and Joe Stagney all voted to make that optional. So if they are your representative, maybe you want to reach out and just ask them why they, what was their philosophical difference with this? Why did they think it needed to be optional?
Why do they think it needed to be optional? And it's just important that we know that people know how their representatives voted on important items of legislation, because it's an important item of legislation, and the 10 Commandments should be in the public schools in Louisiana.
I agree with you. I agree 100%. What harm is it going to do? It's going to let kids know a little bit better and in a more clear way about right and wrong, and that cannot be harmful to society or to their mental well-being.
Absolutely not. and probably will do good.
Yeah.
And do them good.
Yeah. Okay, next up is a bill that we opposed. It was House Bill 234 by Representative Boyd. It was about creating a new class of employees based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Chris, I know you felt very passionate about this. You testified against it. And because of your testimony, no doubt, the bill was killed in committee 10-5 on party lines.
And it was, I really enjoyed testifying on this bill. And I told the committee, and Dixon Macon, my own state rep, is on the committee, and he voted, as he should have, on this. And I just told the committee, I said, if you want to drive employers out of the state of Louisiana, passing this legislation is a good way to do it. We're trying to get businesses to come to Louisiana, not to leave. And this bill would basically set up gender identity, transgender status, all this stuff as a protected class. So if someone goes in as a transgender, or a female who identifies as a male goes in for a job somewhere and is not hired by an employer because the employer doesn't believe that that's a suitable candidate for their line of work, then the next thing you know, you're getting a letter in the mail from a lawyer. You discriminated against my client based upon his or her gender status or gender identity, and so how much money are you going to pay, or we're going to sue you? And you want to drive employers out of the state of Louisiana? Pass this legislation. Fortunately, the House Labor Committee was too smart for that, and it failed on a party line vote 10-5, and thank God it did. Horrible bill.
Yeah, truly horrible bill. Okay, two bills next up by Representative Guyman, both related to carbon capture, carbon dioxide sequestration, which, I happen to think personally is a huge racket. And if people actually cared about the environment, they would just plant more trees if they were so worried about poison of carbon dioxide, which we need for respiration. But anyway, this is I think Representative Guyman, Chris, we talked to him, as you mentioned last week. He is bringing some very common sense middle ground legislation that'll help us not kill the oil and gas industry while they have to do what they have to do to basically make ends meet under the thumb of the Biden regime. So, I mean, I in no way want to take food off of someone's table. The first bill was House Bill 492, and this one was related to eminent domain. And the second is 966, and it's related to unitization. So creating the path forward that allows the industry to be able to lease land similar to the oil and gas industry.
Exactly. And by far, Danielle, the 492, Guyman's 492 eminent domain bill it's not a particularly strong eminent domain bill taken by itself, but when you couple it with House Bill 696, which is a strong bill because it's the unitization bill that requires 75% of affected landowners in a given unit or in a given area that will be subject to carbon capture sequestration. 75% of those affected owners have to sign off on it, which is a substantial percentage in order for the carbon capture sequestration to go forward. So 492 taken with 696 is is pretty strong protection against CCS because it requires a substantial majority, 75% of the affected landowners to sign off on it and agree to it.
Yeah, and we'll see more where this eminent domain issue comes up because people in the legislature, there's some people standing up against it finally. So very happy about that. If you go to our Action Center to take action on these, you will see they are listed together as a package. We are in support of both of those. The eminent domain, the bill that would end the eminent domain, passed unanimously out of House Natural Resources and Environment with an amendment this past week. It will most likely be voted on by the full House in the week ahead. And the unitization bill is also passed out of House Natural Resources, and it's scheduled for floor debate this week on Tuesday. Okay, next up, two bills that are affecting our children. Super pleased with the direction these have taken and the support they have gotten. The first is House Bill 121 by Rep. Cruz. It is about parental consent for pronoun use other than the birth gender. This bill, obviously, we're in support of it. It passed out of House Education this past week with amendments that, believe it or not, folks, strengthened the bill. It was
right. A lot of times the amendments, almost always the amendments weaken bills. But in this case, Dan, you're exactly right. These amendments to Representative Cruz's pronoun bill actually strengthened it because they established through stronger definitions really the fundamental physiological difference between men and women and the fundamental biological difference between men and women. It's kind of unfortunate that we have to have legislation that lays that out for people, but it's
we have
here
Supreme Court justice that doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman, so it would stand to reason maybe some people in Louisiana wouldn't as well. I don't know.
Yes, but there is a very scientific definition laid out for male, very scientific definition laid out for female, and so there can be no confusing of the two anymore, even if it's just a willful ignorance. Also, an employee cannot knowingly and intentionally address a student by any name other than his legal name on his birth certificate, unless he has a written permission from the student's parent or guardian. And an employee cannot be subject to any kind of adverse employment action if he refuses to do that. If he refuses to engage in the woke clown parade, he will not, they cannot terminate him or take any adverse action against him at all. And guess what? If they do, he gets to sue. He can sue them in court with a private right of action and get monetary damages and attorney's fees if he's discriminated against for refusing to go woke. So if he goes woke, he may go broke. But if he refuses to go woke and they try to make him go woke, he won't go broke because he can sue them. And at that point, he will be stoked.
Well, a big cheers to Representative Cruz on this bill. It is scheduled for floor debate in the House this week on Tuesday. And just a note that it was a straight party line vote out of the House Education Committee. The next bill up is House Bill 122 by Representative Dodie Horton, and this one prohibits the discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity in public schools. Obviously, that I think, Chris, it's about administration. Members of basically any employees of the school are not allowed to broach those subjects. I mean, I guess no one can stop kids from speaking amongst themselves on the playground, but this is about the broader issue of teachers and the administration trying to indoctrinate children.
That's exactly right. And you're exactly right, Danielle. It prohibits any administrator or teacher, anybody associated with the school in a position of authority from broaching topics such as gender orientation, sexual orientation, gender identity, including their own. That being the administrator or the teacher or whoever is in a position of authority. They cannot discuss this issue. They cannot bring it up. Obviously, the bill says is if a child wants to have a discussion or needs counseling on something, they're welcome to get that. But teachers and administrators need to be teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic and stay away from this woke leftist sexual gender indoctrination. And that's what this bill is designed to prohibit, and I believe it will.
Awesome. And look, it passed out of House Education this past week on a party line vote with the notable exception of Barbara Freiberg, who joined the Democrats.
That is such a shock to me that Barbara Freiberg would have voted against this legislation. It's like, are you as shocked as I am? Probably
a little less, but perhaps the same exact amount.
Which is zero. Zero shock.
This bill is also scheduled for floor debate in the House on Tuesday. I'm excited to share a fantastic opportunity for State of Freedom listeners who are interested in investing in precious metals or even starting a home-based business in the precious metals industry. Metal Stacks is a precious metals collectors club where you can buy your metals at the best prices on the market, actual dealer cost. They are beating the big sites. They have no credit card fees and no minimums. If you're just interested in purchasing metals at a great price, visit metalstacks.com/dwalker. Get to shopping. That helps me out. I get the commission. You can also refer people to Metal Stacks for an additional income. If you're interested in learning about the referral business aspect of Metal Stacks, email me directly at danielle@freedomstate.us for more information. Some House floor votes that happened this week. Actually, just one House floor vote of note, and that is House Bill 745 by Representative Julie Emerson. This is the educational savings account, the school choice program. You've probably seen a good deal about it, kind of as a headline grabber. And we've had some opposition to this bill. There's a couple issues we take with it, but it did pass the House floor, and it passed with mostly Republicans, but it was not a party line vote. There were 6 Democrats who joined the majority of Republicans in support of it. There were 7 Republicans who joined the Democrats in opposition to it. And I think it just kind of shows that there are some philosophical, splintering here. I think people have different perspectives on this for a variety of reasons, but it has been received in the Senate. It will likely be sent to the Education Committee this week. And Chris, this bill, I think we've discussed it at some length, and we think that it could be salvaged or turned around if there were a couple changes made.
Well, one of the changes that absolutely needs to be made in it, if they're going to be funneling federal money directly or indirectly to private schools, there needs to be something in this bill that establishes very clearly that that will not result in any influence by the federal government over curriculum or anything of the like, or policy or curriculum, because I've never known a situation where federal money flew to any institution, public or private, where the federal government did not try to get its ideological and philosophical nose inside the tent. And I have no reason to believe that this will be any different. And that's the big concern that I have about this bill, that the federal government will end up controlling or having way too much influence in private education than they have right now because of the money they'll be injecting into that system. And if anybody doesn't think that's a problem, it is a problem. And another issue that we have, as you mentioned earlier, Danielle, is that there seems to be discrimination based upon your economic status as to whether or not you would be a beneficiary of the tax money if in order to send your kid to a private school. If you make over a certain amount of money, I think you're automatically disqualified. But as we talked about before, there are a lot of people who work very, very hard and struggle very, very hard. And just because they're over a certain income level does not mean that they could not benefit from that money just as much as someone who is of a lower socioeconomic status. So my point is that if you're going to offer this, you should be offering it to everyone across socioeconomic lines and not discriminate against people based on some arbitrary income threshold.
Well, exactly. And let's be clear, this is our tax dollars. This is the parents' tax dollars. This is yours and my tax dollars. And why should, if it's based on economic differences, should parents who pay the greater share of taxes have less opportunity to send their kids to a private school?
That's such a great point, Danielle. It's like they're discriminating against the very people who've paid most of the taxes.
Yeah, it's a real problem for me. It's a real problem for me. So I can appreciate the sentiment of this, and I can certainly appreciate that, the sound bites are great. But you made the point last week, Chris, that this also does seem to give off the air of, are we just giving up on the public school system altogether, or is everybody just going to go to private school now? I'll be honest with you,
Danielle. If this did result in the final collapse and implosion of the public school apparatus in Louisiana, then I would consider that to be the greatest thing about this bill.
Well, we have great people who are trying to turn that ship around. So I'm not wishing it to totally crash and burn just yet. I think a lot of reform is certainly needed, but hopefully
a lot of reform is certainly needed. And I didn't mean to paint with such a broad stroke, because there are some very good public school districts still in the state, as Brett Guyman told us yesterday. But a number of them are really problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we could go on about this forever, but folks, we have so much more to cover. So we'll move on. The next bill up, y'all know that I have no love lost for this. I probably ought to just call Senator McMath and tell him myself. I have not done that yet, but it is Senate Bill 98, affectionately known as the cockroach bill. This one prohibits the use of a handheld wireless device, a cell phone, by someone while they're operating a motor vehicle upon any public roadway in this state. I'm in strong opposition to this. There's no one saying that you can't eat your cheeseburger. There's no one saying that you can't change the radio station. There's no one saying you can't turn around and yell at your kids. So why are they going to tell you that you can't talk on your phone? It's completely arbitrary. It's a feel-good piece of legislation that's just going to create higher insurance rates. It's literally going to be diverting police officers from doing their job, doing something that's much more worth their while, like fighting crime. But it passed the Senate 33-6. Only 6 Republicans opposed the bill. So thank you to Senator Jean-Paul Cousin, Mike Facey, my senator, Franklin Foyle, Blake Miguez, Greg Miller, and Alan Seabaugh. Thank you, gentlemen, for standing up for our freedoms while the rest of your the rest of your colleagues just laid down and said, let's criminalize talking on a cell phone.
Let's criminalize talking on a cell phone so the state can take more money out of the pockets of law-abiding citizens, and insurance companies can get richer.
Yeah.
So that's basically what this is about. And honest, law-abiding citizens who are perfectly capable of talking on a handheld cell phone and driving a vehicle at the same time are going to be the casualties of this. There's no question about it. And what adds insult to injury, Danielle, is that there is no credible evidence. And Senator McMath in committee was basically forced to admit this to me. When I told him, I said, what is the evidence of a connection between talking on a handheld cell phone and increased traffic accidents? And then he started to talk about, like overall distraction. I said, I'm not talking about social media. I'm not talking about texting. I'm talking about talking on a phone held to your ear. What's the evidence? And there was no evidence. And he knows there's no evidence. So the bottom line is this is going to do nothing to decrease car wrecks. It's going to drive insurance rates up. It's going to infringe upon people's liberty and freedom, cost people money, cost people time, and from a fundamental constitutional perspective and privacy perspective, it's going to create a pretext for further infringements of individual freedom, which we've been saying since this first cockroach came out last year.
Yeah. Well, it has been referred to House Transportation, but it's not on the schedule yet. And so there's plenty of time for other committees to kill it, right?
Absolutely. It's not too late for this thing to die. And believe me, we are absolutely not giving up on it at all. It's got a whole nother chamber to go through, and hopefully people will wake up and recognize what's at stake here.
Yeah. Maybe some salty representatives will stand up and say, not on my watch. That's what I hope.
Absolutely. As long as they're not putting salt on their hamburger while they're driving.
That's right, which they should be able to do if they want to. Okay, now next up is Senate Bill 276 by Senator Presley. For those of you who haven't listened to our interview with Senator Presley, I just can't recommend it enough. He talks about this bill and he talks about the WHO bill that he brought, which we expect to be coming. I believe it's not scheduled for this week. It's scheduled for the following week, or he's expecting it around that time. But this bill creates the crime of coerced criminal abortion and attempted abortion. And Chris, maybe you can remind us of the story, just, brought kind of high level.
Sure. Just very briefly, Thomas Presley's sister, a younger sister, was married for, 8 or 10, 12 years to a guy who was trying to kill her by secretly putting abortion medicine that would induce abortion or abortion pills or whatever in her drinks and in her food. And she began to feel a little bit sick and began to feel suspicious about what was going on. And so she actually put a hidden camera up and she actually saw him putting this poison stuff in her drinks. And so she caught on to it in time, fortunately, to save her unborn child's life. And her unborn child ultimately, was born. And so her child has developmental disabilities because of this. It's so sad, but is alive and doing reasonably well. So that's what prompted Senator Presley, her brother, to bring this legislation, which creates the crime, with serious penalties when either a spouse or just a boyfriend, it doesn't have to be a husband, does this, secretly tries to induce an abortion in their girlfriend or their wife without their wife or girlfriend knowing about it. And who would have thought that someone would be even capable of doing something like this? But unfortunately, it's the world we live in. So I think the legislation is very good. And I think anybody who would do something like this, I'm not sure they should ever get out of prison. But, I'm not the one making that decision, but it is a good bill. And I'm glad Senator Presley, and hats off to his sister for having the courage to share her story.
Absolutely. And it passed out of Senate Judiciary C this past week. It's set on Senate orders and it is not scheduled yet, but I don't see any reason why this shouldn't pass through. It's a very compelling story and it's pretty clear, that this is abortion. This is attempted abortion. This is, if you can't see that, I can't help you. I'm not sure what else to say about it.
If you can't see that, then there's not a whole lot we could do for you.
Right. Next up is Senate Bill 6 by Senator Connick, and it is about misleading synthetic media. It's about AI, people who misuse AI to mislead people about certain things that people may have said or done. And we had we liked the bill, Chris, and then I think it got amended and we didn't like it. And then it got fixed based on our objections or suggestions, however you like to posture that. And so we were happy with the bill again, and you can maybe walk us through some of that. But it did pass the Senate floor with one amendment, and that was the amendment that we were happy with.
Absolutely. In fact, I mentioned I mentioned two concerns in the committee when I testified on this, and Senator Connick, to his credit, was very receptive. One of the concerns that we had was that the AI, the liability for deceptively using artificial intelligence would only go to the individual citizens, so the individuals, but the big broadcasters would be immune from liability and immune from responsibility. And I remember you and I were talking, and Danielle, we were saying, well, if a big broadcaster knowingly uses AI, knowing that it's deceptive, knowing that it's false, and they don't disclose that when they're reporting it, then or presenting it, well, why should they have any less liability than an ordinary citizen?
Exactly.
And as it turns out, there was an amendment put on it. And so the amendment now basically imposes the same liability on the big broadcasters unless they did not have knowledge that the digital voice replicas or the depictions were false.
Which is super fair.
Which is super fair. The second concern we had was for the First Amendment protections. We wanted to make sure that the First Amendment was not unduly implicated in this, and so there was another amendment which specifically now says that First Amendment protections will always constitute a defense when someone's accused of violating this law. So Senator Connick was very amenable. We're very pleased with the way the bill turned out, and I think at this point, it will both serve to protect people from the false and malicious use of AI, and at the same time, make sure that people who are truly responsible for its misuse are held liable, and also that the First Amendment is protected. So it's a good bill at this point.
Awesome. I'm super happy that he made those changes, and we can see that because, the way it was standing, Chris, fake news was just poised to just get out of control even worse. And of course, we know that everything they say is a lie, but this was just going to be, a free reign further than it already is. I can't even talk about how free reign it is because it's hard to imagine that they're reined in at all. But
that's what I'm saying. I wish there would be one long reign on their parade.
Well, maybe we'll see that one day soon.
Well, this bill is going to help. This bill will help at least get them a drizzle.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, well, that is the big wrap up of what happened last week. So guys, y'all can tell that was plenty. But imagine if that was double or triple. That's what's coming up next week. So we're going to try and make it quick and clean. We'll see how far we can get in this. Okay, Monday, House Bill 238 by Representative Eccles This is going to be seen in, or heard rather, I guess seen and heard, in House Appropriations Committee. It is about the protection of our agricultural land from foreign adversaries. We support this bill. Chris, did you testify on this one in House Ag?
I testified on it last year. Did not testify because it went last year too. I didn't testify on it this year because I was in another committee room.
Yeah,
but we definitely put a LACAG green card in, and we definitely expressed our strong support of it orally. But I didn't formally testify. No. But this is, as you said, this is a very common sense bill. Basically, prevents our foreign enemies like China from buying agricultural land in Louisiana. China and other countries, but particularly China, most noteworthy, they're doing everything they can to dismantle our critical infrastructure in any way that they can. So this is a common sense bill. It says, no, China, you're not buying land in our state, agricultural land in our state. So it is now, I believe it's going now to appropriations, right, Danielle?
Yep. It'll be in appropriations Monday morning, bright and early.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it's in appropriations is because they're going to try to figure out what the cost is going to be. But basically, I want to know what's it going to cost for the Attorney General to bring an action against anybody who would violate this law against foreign enemies who are trying to buy land here. Well, my thought is, probably not a whole lot, but no matter what it costs, it's worth it.
It's a lot less than losing your land to foreign adversaries. Absolutely.
Amen.
Okay. House Civil Law has a couple of important bills that they will be hearing tomorrow. One of them is, the first one up is House Bill 833 by Representative Paula Davis. This one would redefine some important things when it comes to in vitro fertilization. In our view, it dehumanizes babies that are frozen. These are fertilized eggs. These are embryos that are waiting for implantation. So conception has happened. And, Debbie Melvin shared with us some of her thoughts and concerns and just her, she's been very prayerful about this and has taken this bill extremely seriously. And I think that really the way it looks, Chris, Representative Davis is trying to completely strip the humanity and strip the rights away of these embryos who, through no fault of their own, have not yet been implanted.
Exactly. And clearly we are talking about human life here. Just a couple of points on Davis's bill. And I'm sure her intentions are good. I would assume that her intentions are good. But you're right. The bill absolutely diminishes the intrinsic value of unborn life, and it is a slippery slope. For instance, right now, a human embryo, under present law in Louisiana, a human embryo is a fertilized human ovum, a human being with certain rights granted by law. Well, her legislation would change the definition of human embryo from a human being to in vitro fertilized ovum that may develop into an unborn child. Right now, the law is that it will develop into an unborn child. Present law also says that a human embryo, because it's a human, can actually sue or be sued. Proposed law does not allow that because, again, she's trying to suggest that we're only dealing with potential life here, not real life here. For instance, her bill says, present law says that this is the core of it right here. Under present law, an in vitro fertilized human ovum is a biological human being, and we all know that is true. Her bill changes that and says that an in vitro fertilized human ovum is only a potential life and has the potential to develop into a biological human being, which is absolutely not true scientifically. And we know that that's not true. So that is the main difference, is that she redefines what is a human embryo once fertilization has occurred. We know that human life, both our faith and our science and our common sense tell us that human life begins at conception, but she changes the definition of that and says that it is only potential human life. And that, to me, is too much of a slippery slope. Either we believe in the intrinsic value of human life or we don't. And that's why I don't like the bill.
Yeah. And we know, Chris, that these embryos, these babies in waiting are really fodder for scientific study, right? Like we know that part of the reason that people want to redefine these things, part of the reason they want to dehumanize these babies is because they want to be able to buy and sell embryos for scientific study and for whatever other ghastly reasons. And the legislature of the state of Louisiana needs to stand in the way of that happening.
You're exactly right, Danielle. I believe that people will thoroughly misuse this if this bill passes. They want to remove any and all ethical considerations when it comes to treating unborn human life with dignity. So if it's only a potential life, we can discard whatever we need to discard that doesn't work. We can use it for research, wherever we want to do. And we have no longer have any ethical concerns about the humanity of the unborn child or the embryo. That's ultimately what this is about, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like it one bit. And I will indeed be very prayerful about this. It will be heard in House Civil Law, as I mentioned, 9 a.m. Monday morning. And the Civil Law Committee is a very good committee. There's some strong pro-life people on that committee. So I'm hopeful that this meets a quick demise in that committee and we don't have to follow this any further because it's just a disgrace.
It is.
Okay, well, switching gears completely into a very positive mode is House Bill 866 by Representative Beryl Amedee. It's an anti-discrimination bill, and it is basically saying that if a patient refuses certain medical treatments, you can't discriminate against them. But Chris, it goes farther, much farther beyond just patients, right?
It does. This bill is such a great bill by Amedee, and she's such a great legislator. This prohibits any kind of discrimination, retaliation, or any kind of adverse treatment by any public or private entity against any citizen who refuses any medical procedure, any protocol, or any medical device. And it's just very broad, and there are no exceptions. No entity, public or private in Louisiana, can force any citizen to undergo any type of medical procedure, get any protocol or any kind of medical device. And she specifically includes in here experimental vaccines, mRNA type vaccines, but it's not limited to that. It's anything. And if the law is violated, importantly, she has a very strong penalty provision in here, which allows the person who was aggrieved or discriminated against to file a lawsuit and get triple damages, which is a lot, which is very substantial. So Beryl Amedee is not playing around with this bill.
Well, I like it so much because, Chris, when I started reading about it, all I could think about were those stories that we heard in the aftermath during COVID, and then even in the years following, even as late as 2022, maybe even last year, we're seeing these stories of people who needed a critical transplant or needed some particular very specialized surgery, and the surgeons, or probably not the surgeons, but at least the hospital, the conglomerates were refusing the medical treatment because they did not want to get the vaccine. And that to me is just an absolute violation of the Hippocratic Oath. It's a slap in the face to personal choice when it comes to your own personal medical decisions. And I think this bill by Representative Amedee will go a long way to protecting people in the state of Louisiana from that kind of unconscionable treatment by the medical professional community.
That is so well said.
It's just hats off to Representative Amedee, and it goes far beyond that. It reaches, like you said, Chris, employees, employers. It's just, in a free society, we shouldn't need a bill like this, but here we are, and I'm just so thankful.
In a free society, we shouldn't need a bill like this. You're right.
But I'm so thankful that we have representatives who have the foresight and the strength of character to bring something like this. So thank you very much, Representative Amedee. Okay, next up is a very unlikely bill. I was very surprised to see this, but I was also super happy to see it. It's coming into House Transportation. Of course, everything's happening at 9 a.m. on Monday morning because we can, our split personalities will get there, Chris.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have to call out the troops. If you hear this before 9 a.m., get to the Capitol. Okay. House Bill 957 by Representative Jordan. This is an issue I did not know existed because, as I said earlier in the show, I have a very old car. It's 20 years old, celebrating her 20th year on the planet this year. And this prohibits vehicle manufacturers and distributors from sharing driver information without the driver's consent. Now, you may not be aware of this, as I was not, but my sister, who knows things about technology that go far beyond my abilities and understanding, was telling me the other day, completely unprompted, completely unrelated to this, that every time you bring in your car, if it has a computer, okay, my car doesn't have a computer. We've established that. If you bring your car to the dealership and it's getting, just getting serviced, whatever, the dealership, unbeknownst to you, is uploading the car's data, the data from that computer, on to their servers, and they are selling it. They're selling your private data to insurance companies and to used car resale outlets like Carfax. So all these people have all this information about you that you don't know that they have. You didn't authorize them to have. And I mean, it's just wrong on its face. It's a complete violation of privacy.
Absolutely. And I didn't even realize this was going on, Danielle, until you explained it to me. I didn't realize it, but this is just a huge breach of personal privacy. And this bill by Representative Jordan, really kind of an unlikely person to bring this, because he's usually opposed to us when it comes to issues of privacy and consent and all of that. But I believe he probably had a constituent who brought this to his attention, and to his credit, he's bringing it. And this bill will just prevent precisely the kind of private data that you're talking about from the customers from being disclosed to any third parties without the express consent of the customer. The manufacturer, the dealer cannot disclose any of this information cannot be disclosed to a manufacturer or to a dealer without express consent of the customer. And, the only concern I have about this, Danielle, is that when you sign these car contracts and you're buying a vehicle, usually there's a 20, 30, 40-page contract there that you're looking at. And the print is so small, most people don't know what they're reading. And we've reached out to Representative Jordan to try to make this provision in the contract much more prominent, where they actually have to opt in and expressly give their authority, maybe like on a separate page or a half of a page where it's very clearly written there. And if you opt in, then we can disclose your information. If you do not opt in, then we cannot. And so that's the only concern that I have at this point, that I'm not sure that people will be able to read it or know about it if it's just boilerplate buried in a contract.
Yeah. And of course, I'm not 100% certain of the type of data that your car's uploading, but imagine that it is your average speed. Imagine that it's your max speed in a given week, the number of times you stopped really quickly. And then they're selling that to insurance companies who can just, if they sell it to all the insurance companies, that's just going to keep your rates high. You're not necessarily getting in an accident, right? You're driving your car. They can't see what's happening. I mean, maybe who knows if they're even uploading some kind of other data. But all that to say, that kind of spying and basically selling of our private data needs to go away. And I just appreciate that Representative Jordan is bringing it. And I really hope that House Transportation sees the issue and it's just a slam dunk tomorrow, which will be today by the time you hear it. There is another important privacy bill coming up in House Commerce, and that committee starts at 9:30 in the morning. and it is House Bill 577 by Representative Carver, and it prohibits social media companies from collecting data to use for targeted advertising to minors. If you heard one of our preview episodes at the start of this session, we highlighted this one as an important one to protect the data of minors from being sold to third parties.
Yeah. And importantly, the social media platforms cannot sell personal data of an account holder who's under the age of 18, who's located in the state. So they can't sell their data. So this is a very important personal privacy bill that will protect minors. I certainly hope it passes. And I can't imagine. I mean, I'd be surprised if this does not pass.
Yeah, it should pass. It makes perfect sense. Everybody, you would think, wants to protect children, but, House Commerce has been a wild card in the past. So I hope that people are considering their own children's safety, their own children's data as they take their vote in this one.
Oh, the last thing, Danielle, there are some pretty stiff penalties in this one as well.
Awesome.
for violations of it. The Attorney General could bring a civil action on behalf of a child whose rights have been violated, and they could be subject to up to a $10,000 penalty per violation. So that's pretty stiff, and the money that they get would go into the state general fund.
Well, that's a pretty big stick. So maybe the social media companies will sit up and pay attention.
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in terms of Monday, we may have saved the best for last for many of you. You may think this is the absolute best. This is House Bill 844 by Representative Reiser, and it would repeal the individual income tax starting in January of 2026.
You just put me in an absolutely euphoric mood when you said that. It reminded me of this bill. I don't know what I'm going to do to contain myself at this point, but you're right. HB 844, repeal the state income tax. I am just absolutely thrilled about this, as I'm sure a lot of hard Louisiana workers are. We're taxed to death in this state. We can barely walk across the room without being taxed in this state. Everything we do is taxed. So if I'm very pleased about the bill. The only concern that I hope that this does not result in simply raising taxes in other areas, like raising the payroll taxes or raising the sales taxes or raising the property taxes. I hope that they do not just go try to find another bucket to make up for this loss instead of just tightening up their own belts and learning how to spend less money. That's the only concern that I have. But as far as it goes, and we're going to, obviously, I guarantee you that's going to be a question that Representative Reiser is asked by probably every single committee member. How are we going to make up this money, Representative Reiser? And I'm certain that he'll have an answer.
Yeah. And, there are several representatives and senators who are trying to bring legislation to tighten up the budget, to bring fiscal discipline to the House, the large House, not just the House, but the House and the Senate. And I think that it's just time that they get their pencils out and they get their spreadsheets out and they figure it out, because our money's not being well spent. Our money is not being used in ways that actually benefit the taxpayers. And it's time to rectify that situation. And if it needs to start because we're repealing the individual income tax and they have to go back to the drawing board on where money comes from and what gets prioritized, I hope they do that. I hope they prioritize the budget so hard. I'm ready to see some things cut from the budget, and I'm ready to see
me too.
Roads and bridges prioritized. I'm ready to see the real work of government get done, and the things that don't have any place in the government get cut out.
Get cut out. Cut it out. I would kind of like it if Representative Reiser had in this bill a provision that prohibits the raising of taxes in any other area of government.
That's right. Just figure it out. Just figure it out like the rest of us.
Yeah. So hopefully we end up in a really good position with this bill, and I'm very, very happy that he's bringing it. And I'm actually going to be there and testify for this one. And I'm also curious about the questions about where they're going to try to make up this shortfall.
Yeah. We shall see.
Yeah.
Make sure you join us tomorrow for the rest of the week of ahead. You don't want to miss it. A lot of exciting bills, a lot of good things coming forward.
Thanks for listening to The State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to The State of Freedom, LLC, at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.